On August 8th, 2024, 34-year-old Christopher Best was working at a radar station on the very remote island of Brevort in Nunavut, Canada. Now, again, this is a very remote and desolate place, but Christopher actually really liked being there. And he liked being there for one reason in particular, and that was because he was an amateur photographer and he really liked taking pictures of animals, of the wildlife. Well, this is a pretty cool hobby to have, but it was actually a pretty concerning hobby for Christopher's family, particularly his mother. And the reason is that when Christopher would send her all these pictures he was taking, or when she would see them on his social media, there was one animal or group of animals in particular that were nearly always featured in these photos.
You see what's the crazy part? The crazy thing is, you know, anytime anytime I hear stories about that's involving bears, it never ends well. It's one of those things that's like, it's one of those things that's like, it's kind of hard to explain, but it's like, you know, anyone like every story that I've heard, no matter what it is, it's like I've never heard a story of anyone that's hanging around bears, dealing with bears or anything like that, and their story ends up in a good in a good way. But if y'all know a story out there that's different, where it's a positive story that ended up in in a good way, man, let me know. Let me know. But other than that, let's see.
And those were the polar bears that lived locally right there on Brevard, right around this radar station where Christopher lived. And Christopher's mom knew that polar bears are not safe animals to be around, like not at all. But Christopher would
All right.
tell her and reassure her over and over that he was taking most of these pictures from inside or inside of vehicles. And the ones that he was taking outside, he was far enough away from these bears to where they weren't really a threat to him. Eventually, his mom, she just ended up having to accept this as reality. Well, living at the radar station alongside Christopher, there were some biologists, some wildlife experts who were there to study and monitor the polar bear population. Christopher obviously made friends with some of them, and he asked them to please alert him anytime there were bears in or near the compound. Not as a safety precaution, but he wanted to go and take pictures of these animals. And so
There you go, right there. So, um, he wanted them to alert him so that way so he can go and take pictures of these polar bears. Yeah, it's crazy because I'm assuming that the compound doesn't have any gates or any fences or anything, because for him to take these pictures, I mean, he did say he was taking them from inside of his car or inside of the compound itself. But, you know, it's always one of those things that's like, when someone really wants something, they start to push the boundaries and try to get as close as possible. It's like it always happens. They try to get as close as possible to the animal, and then, some tragic happens. I feel like this is one of these stories. But again, I don't know. But let's see.
sure enough, on August 8th, one of these biologists approached Christopher and they told him there was a bear in the compound. It was just out the front doorways. If you wanted to take pictures of it, it was there. So Christopher gathered up his camera and he went walking out the front door. Now, all of this is on security camera. I don't believe most of it has actually been released to the general public, but it is on security camera. So that's how we know basically exactly what happened. So this bear is a pretty good distance away. I'm not sure exactly how far, but far enough to where it wasn't really a threat at all. So Christopher, he took his camera and he started to get a little closer and a little closer and a little closer, but still not close enough to
I
where he
knew
was
it.
really in any danger.
You see, like I knew it. Like, they push the boundaries so far to the point, you get closer, you start to get comfortable, right? Okay, I got this close last time, and then, nothing happened. So let me get a little closer. And then to the point they get so close, and then, they end up in a situation that's they can't get out of. I hope the story doesn't end that way, but I have a feeling that's it's gonna probably end that way. Not sure, but let's see.
Except for the fact that there was something that Christopher did not know, and it wasn't initially picked up on the security footage either. And that was behind him, creeping up on the side of the building that he had just left, was a second polar bear. Nobody knew it was there, including Christopher. And this bear, when it saw Christopher, it began to stalk him, coming up from behind and off to the side of him. It made its way all the way up behind Christopher.
I ain't gonna lie, that's you know, that's some scary stuff right there, man. To yeah, I don't know what I would do in that situation.
And stood directly in between the front door of the compound that Christopher had just left and Christopher. In other words, Christopher had nowhere to run to. There was no escape route anymore. And when this bear got in between Christopher and the door, the bear charged at Christopher. And Christopher presumably heard it coming and turned, but by that time, the bear has tackled him to the ground. It was on top of him almost instantly, and it began to maul him terribly. Now,
That that's a situation where if I was in that situation, man, I would have been tight. I would have been tight. I wouldn't know what to do. You can't outrun a bear. You can't outrun them. And it's like, he already got you cut off, so it's like, where are you gonna run to? You know? So the only way he would have lived is if he would have ran to the compound. But by then it was already too late. You know, this bear is probably like 600 pounds, 400 pounds, 500 pounds, you know, and it can run pretty fast. You're not gonna win. It's a fight that's just you're not gonna win that fight. So you know, I don't know why people put themselves in situations like that, but it's one of those things that's it's like, it makes you ask the question why, like why would you, I know it's a lot of people have a passion, a lot of people like certain things and stuff like that, but I don't think your passion should be over your safety. You know what I mean? But we'll see.
you're not putting up a fight against a polar bear. They can stand up to about 11 feet tall on their hind legs. They're just massive animals. Not only that, but they're one of the few animals on Earth that actively hunt humans. They don't attack out of defense,
Wow,
they attack because they want to eat you. Anyways, you're not fighting one of them.
that's crazy.
But even so, that first polar bear that Christopher was taking pictures of, when it saw the second polar bear take down Christopher, it turned and it came sprinting over and it also began to maul Christopher. And these bears basically began to actively eat Christopher alive. Now, shortly after this started, the staff inside the radar station, they were alerted to this. I don't know if they could hear him making noise, screaming, or if somebody was watching on the security cameras and told them. I don't know how they were alerted, but they were alerted. They had rifles in the station, and so a group of them gathered up rifles and they went running out to try and help Christopher. But by the time they got out there, it was very apparent from what was left of Christopher that he was no longer alive. The bears had.
You know, that's a bad way to go, man. It's bad to have, you know, one bear pretty much tearing you apart, but to have a second one join in it's a horrible way to go, man. And like I said, I've seen the way bears, how aggressive they get when they're eating. It's one of those things that's terrifying. It's one of those things that, you know, you wouldn't wish on your worst enemy. Those things yeah, they're strong and, pretty aggressive. And, the first time I seen it, I was like, yeah, man, I, those are some animals that, you know, I, I respect. And if I see one, yeah, there's no being tough, you got to get up out of there. But I don't mind watching them from TV or seeing them in a zoo, but you won't catch me nowhere near these animals. Yeah, not me.
Again started to consume him. Well, the workers, they fired at these polar bears. They hit one of them, and they killed one of the polar bears. The other one fled. As far as I know, there was no effort to hunt down or track that second polar bear, so I believe that polar bear came away uninjured. But of course, Christopher was deceased and the other polar bear was deceased. After this event,
Man, rest in
Christopher's mother
peace.
kind of blamed the company that
Sad
runs the radar
situation.
station for not having adequate fencing up around the compound and then for lack of wildlife safety training. The company never really admitted fault to any of this, but since this event, they have come out and said they've made improvements in both of those areas, both in physical security and in training, in an effort to prevent anything this tragic from ever happening again.
Man, it is one of those tragic, pretty tragic stories. And it's just, rest in peace, to him. And it's just a tough situation to to hear about, just the way it happened and stuff like that. But man, if y'all like these type of contents, I mean, as far as these type of stories and stuff where we can react to them, y'all let me know and stuff. But all right. And the last part is pretty much keep God first, family second, and everything else third. All right.